Fantasy football isn't won on draft day, not even close. The real difference maker is what happens after the season starts. Trading is your most underrated way to fix your roster and win your league. So today, let's run through the top 10 players that you need to trade for before it's too late. But if this is your first time here, I'm Joe. I've helped thousands of people just like you win their fantasy leagues over the last decade, and I plan to do the same for you in this video. I start off every video with some urgent fantasy football news and answer some timely Q&A. Then we get into today's one key topic, so feel free to skip ahead, but let's get right into it. News-wise, we have a lot to talk about today. Obviously, the trade deadline has come and gone yesterday, but the big one that we have to touch on immediately is the Colts just landed Sauce Gardner in a blockbuster trade, one of the wildest deadline moves I've seen in quite some time. Indy paid a massive price for the all-pro corner. The Colts sent A.D. Mitchell plus 2 first-round picks to the Jets for Sauce Gardner, who hasn't quite looked like his rookie self the past 2 seasons under Aaron Glenn and that system. But even if he's slipped a little bit, it's still a huge upgrade for a secondary that's been hanging on by a thread. Once Shadarius Ward is healthy, Indy could roll out Gardner, Ward, and Kenny Moore in the playoff push. That's pretty elite, so no direct fantasy impact here unless you're in like a deep IDP league, but it does make life a lot tougher for opposing wide receiver ones when they face the Colts from here on out. The next trade that we have to talk about is Jakobi Meyers. Big move in Jacksonville, obviously, and they say they're not just renting him as a wideout. They're making a real investment here in Jakobi Meyers. The Jags sent a 4th and a 6th to Vegas for Jakobi, and the early reports are saying that they plan to keep him long term. Definitely not treating him not treating him as a 1-year patch. And it's looking like they're expected to give him a small package of plays right away. But the bigger takeaway here is that Jacksonville clearly doesn't love the injury outlook for Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter. From a fantasy angle, Meyers probably becomes the team's wide receiver 1 once he's up to speed, dependent on the health of Brian Thomas Jr., obviously. And Parker Washington's probably the one that gets squeezed here. Meanwhile, Trey Tucker is now the default wide receiver 1 in Vegas with Jakobi gone. Probably a little bit more for Brock Bowers as well. Also, on this injury front in Jacksonville, looking at this injury for Brian Thomas Jr., I'm a little bit more nervous than I was before because we've had some mixed signals coming out of Jacksonville yesterday. Brian Thomas Jr. said that he's been dealing with that low-grade high ankle sprain, though there's still an outside chance that he suits up this week, but it seems like the team's being a little bit hush-hush on this injury, probably factored into why they brought in Jakobi Meyers in general. But if Thomas does sit, Jakobi could slide right into those missing targets, so fantasy managers should plan accordingly. And then looking at this deal, the Seahawks trade for Shaheed, this is one of the ones that I thought was the most interesting for fantasy. Obviously, Rashid Shaheed is one of the league's most dangerous deep threats. The Seahawks have already basically proven that they can have a high up-tempo offense that really pushes the ball downfield, and adding a guy like this, it's really the perfect fit. The Seahawks sent a 4th and a 5th to the Saints for Rashid Shaheed, reuniting him with offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, and he was obviously the guy that called plays for him in New Orleans last year. So Shaheed's been thriving already in that downfield role again this season, already over 500 yards, 2 TDs through 9 games. Now he gets a major QB upgrade. Fantasy-wise, I think he's still probably a boomer bust wide receiver 3 who's going to be tied to some big plays, but his arrival could knock Torrey Horton out of 3 wide receiver sets, at least when Cooper Kupp is back. But really nice move for the Seahawks and a nice fit for fantasy managers that have him. Garrett Wilson was untouchable at the deadline. I thought this was kind of an interesting move as well. Be interested what you guys think at the deadline or in the comments if you guys think that they should have moved on from Garrett Wilson to load up on more picks. But some front offices definitely tried to pry him loose, but it looks like the Jets wouldn't even pick up the phone. So not available in any trade talks, even though multiple teams made calls. Still recovering from that knee issue from the London game, but just through 6 games, still has a really nice stat line this year. Explains why New York isn't entertaining offers. I don't think they're in the business of trading elite young wide receivers, so I kind of agree with them. I think it's going to be like the cornerstone of their offense going forward, which makes sense. And it looks like they're not going to be moving on from him after the season as well. I'm expecting him back in this week or next week and locked in kind of as that alpha role once he's healthy. So wheels up, Garrett Wilson. Kyler Murray was benched in Arizona. This was kind of a big shakeup in Arizona. Obviously, the Cardinals are making that major change under center. He's officially been benched, but reportedly he's still dealing with like a lingering foot issue. So that definitely played into this decision. But performance is also a pretty big part for Kyler. He just hasn't been good. Jacoby Brissett has really just unlocked Marvin Harrison Jr. He's obviously been helping McBride score more touchdowns this year. All of those things for a journeyman versus Murray in that massive contract extension that he did sign. The fact that they're going to be benching him in favor of Jacoby Brissett is really huge. So from a fantasy standpoint, it kind of is really big for these weapons. I actually think it's a positive thing for both McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr., but Murray's future in Arizona looks potentially done. We will see. Let's roll through these last few, and then we got to get into some questions. But Marvin Mims does look like he's going to be returning. He did clear the concussion protocol, so that will be good news to get him back on the field for week 10 in Thursday Night Football. Also, it looks like the Bears are kind of trying to grab another running back. So they had 4 running backs in for a tryout. So we'll see if they end up continuing to give a bunch of work to Kyle Monangai or if they end up getting DeAndre Swift back from injury. But it's definitely one of those signals that they're preparing for Swift to miss more time and that fantasy managers should stay alert. Brandon Ayuk. This one's brutal, right? We have another delay here for his return in San Francisco. The team has already confirmed that they will not be opening his 21-day practice window this week as he works back from that knee injury. It's the latest sign, I guess, that original Week 10 target was way too optimistic. Fantasy-wise, it looks like we won't see Ayuk back until at least December. So I think we keep stashing him, but yeah, not good. Would anyone be surprised if he wasn't a factor this entire season? I don't think I would be either. Omarion Hampton, he's also delayed again. So there's still people that are saying he's walking around in a walking boot. And Jim Harbaugh said that Omarion Hampton's return window won't even open until after the Chargers Week 12 bye. So that's also not great. No real sign of huge progress here yet, but Kamani Vidal remains the back to roster. Once Hampton's finally activated, he's expected to reclaim that lead role. Packers rookie Matthew Golden did avoid a setback, though, which is positive. It looks like he's going to be back sooner rather than later, which is good news for the Packers, who just lost Kraft to a torn ACL. Terry McLaurin likely out through the bye. This was pretty tough news for Washington. Dan Quinn said that he doesn't expect Terry McLaurin to play in Week 10, and then they have the upcoming bye. So the earliest realistic return for him looks like Week 13 or so. Quinn even admitted that the team factored the bye into the decision, but they're oddly not putting him on IR. So for fantasy managers, I think we have to plan to be without McLaurin for at least a few weeks and explore some bench options to fill in there. Last news item, I just wanted to highlight that T. Higgins has cleared concussion protocol, so sigh of relief out of Cincinnati. Let's touch on some questions from the last video. Got a bunch of really good ones, so want to try and rip through as many as possible, give you guys some direction, rest of season, trade targets, all that good stuff. I know this is a really big time for trades, so want to try and help you guys out as much as possible. But before we get into some of the trade-related questions, I thought this first one was pretty interesting as well, talking about Bucky Irving. Yeah, not a great development so far because he did not practice on Wednesday. And that was something that I was watching for as the Bucs come out of their bye week. There was hope that he would be back ahead of Tampa's Week 10 game against the Patriots after being sidelined for more than a month with that foot and shoulder injury. So if Bucky can't get in a limited practice on Thursday or Friday, he's likely going to miss Week 10. That leaves Rachaad White as the team's lead back. And it's something that we have to get some clarity on very soon. Still bullish on Bucky and this stretch run, but we were hoping to get him back a little bit sooner. So that's my update on Bucky Irving. Let's get into some trade stuff. Do I trade Stefon Diggs and Jaylen Warren for Zay Flowers? For me, this one's pretty clear. I would rather have Stefon Diggs and Jaylen Warren. Zay Flowers is definitely the best player in this deal rest of season, but that's a pretty nice haul for him, getting 2 starters, Stefon Diggs and Jaylen Warren. So the overall value, I think I would prefer the first side there. All right. Rest of season, Odunze, Juwan Jennings, Diggs, Keenan Allen. Yeah, so how would I rank these guys and who would be the most reliable? My order would be Odunze, Diggs, Jennings, and Allen by my kind of rest of season rankings. Odunze is the one that would be still a big target for me. We're going to talk about him later in this video as a potential buy low. JK and Tet for Bijan. Yeah, I still prefer Bijan in this deal, especially this time of the year. I'm trying to do these 2-for-1 trades on winning rosters. So if you've been watching a bunch of this content, I hope that you have plenty of winning teams right now. So this is the time I want to be actually kind of accumulating some of the studs versus just having the most depth possible through the bye week. So if you need someone, I get it. Or if you need multiple starters, I get it. But Bijan Robinson is still by far the best player in this deal, obviously. And I would try and get a little bit more from him for sure. Drop Keenan Allen to pick up Downs or Pierce. I already have Pittman on my team. Yeah, I don't really, it doesn't matter to me if there's going to be two guys on the team. I think that even just like stacking up some of the best offenses is still something that I would be interested in. That said, I still have Keenan Allen slightly ahead of Josh Downs and Alec Pierce rest of season. Keenan Allen slightly ahead, so I would not be dropping him for either of those players right now. I traded Tez and Marks for Sutton. Thoughts? Yeah, I like that for you. Sutton is one of those guys too that I do like, but Woody Marks is still someone that I think has a lot of room for growth. So if you need two starters, I do have both of those players ahead of the total value of Cortland Sutton. Hope that helps. Should I trade Gibbs for Bucky and Franklin? Because Gibbs has been very inconsistent and has had horrendous fantasy weeks. Yeah, I've actually got a bunch of questions about Jahmyr Gibbs today, so he's going to be the first player that we talk about here in the key topic. I'm buying Jahmyr Gibbs, especially after last week. I think that just in general, it was a really good approach that the Vikings had. We'll get into that in a second. This one in particular, I'm definitely not trading Gibbs for Bucky and Troy Franklin. Should I trade Ja'Marr Chase for Javonte Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. full PPR? Had to look at this one a little bit. I am most likely on any team not trading Ja'Marr Chase at this point, though. So it's relatively close if you just look at these two combined rest of season. But yeah, I still prefer the best player in this deal, Ja'Marr Chase, and that would be my side. Would you trade Derrick Henry for Bucky Irving? I would not. I have Derrick Henry significantly ahead of Bucky Irving as of now. So I would not be doing that. I guess quickly, what happened to Jake Ferguson? I think that whoever answered this with CD is back. I do kind of think that that's a very similar, I have very similar thoughts on that. Also, they just played one of the best teams in the league at shutting down tight ends in Denver. So Jake Ferguson and that zero that he dropped on us on National Tight End Day, I think that was a big part of it. But I do think that Ferguson going forward is still going to have a pretty big role in one of the best offenses in the league. But CD does definitely hurt his volume. They see similar targets through the slot and through the middle. Obviously, if you haven't checked out my top 150 rankings, you can get them for free at top150free.com and join the membership community at fantasyaccelerator.com if you want more direct access to me and you didn't get your question answered today. I answer every question in there. We'll get you guys covered 365 days a year and get you ready to roll for down the stretch run to win your league. So again, I mentioned it before, but one of the players I've been hearing the most about in comments is Jahmyr Gibbs. So let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs for a second, because he's a player that I absolutely would be trading for right now. I think people are panicking a little bit after like kind of just one recent dud, 9 carries for 25 yards, 3 short catches in a game that Minnesota played from ahead basically the entire game. So I think it was more of like a game flow issue, not a role problem. Even with like the volatility that we've seen from this Ben Johnson offense, I still think that he's feasting enough to be a top 5 overall player, which means that I would be buying a proven like elite producer at a temporary discount that you might not get again. Basically, I would say that Flores had a really great game plan, and it basically just forced Jahmyr Gibbs into more pass protection than he typically has to face. So I think that was more of what we saw here, not that we're going to see this going forward, and that for like basically, I don't think there's any reason to think that the ceiling has just completely gone away. People forget like week 7, he absolutely exploded, 136 rushing yards, 82 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. So that's not something I'm just ignoring by any means. So he's already housed a 78-yard touchdown recently. Like all of these things are still in my brain, and he's still really the engine of an offense that's going to score a ton of points. And he's one of those guys that I think the workload is always going to be somewhat capped by Montgomery, but it's not really going to be a situation where I'm letting one bad game scare me off like a very elite running back down the stretch. Their matchups are pretty solid. They're also playing a lot indoors down the stretch as well. So him on the fast track, I think that the big plays will be coming again. He's been basically stacking up touchdowns for multiple years now. So if you can trade for him, he'd be one of my top targets right now. And again, anytime you get one of these elite players that comes off of a dud like that, just take the temperature on the guy that owns him. It might be a waste of time, or you might be able to package and get a guy like this cheaper than you would have off of a massive performance, obviously. TreVeyon Henderson. In this video, yet again, been trying to get you guys to trade for TreVeyon most of the year. Ramondre obviously sits in this game, and Henderson finally gets that featured volume that we've been looking for. A career high 18 touches in week 9, turned 14 carries into just 55 yards, but did add 4 catches for 32. So the thing that I was looking at was the snaps, though. 51 snaps to Terrell Jennings, 17 after starting in place of Ramondre. So that's real lead back usage, not just a gadget role or anything like that. The Patriots basically had no choice but to feature him at this point, but he did well with the touches that he had. So I'm trading for a guy who's already proven that he can kind of handle that feature workload. And I think that we'll start to continue to get more efficiency from him as well. Obviously, Jennings vultured that touchdown. So some of the red zone work is a little bit in question, but I still think that Henderson is tied for the team lead with 6 targets is really encouraging, showing that they trust him on passing downs. And that was the big concern, even if they're being a little bit cautious at the goal line. The explosion that everyone kind of drafted him for, and I mean, I was definitely one of those people that was drafting TreVeyon Henderson this year, finally showed up. So even in week 8, we can go back to that. He ripped off 10 carries for 77 yards, career-long 27-yard run, multiple first down conversions, all the things that we wanted to see from an explosive player in space, we finally saw. So the Patriots basically have described them as like ecstatic, that he can be one of those guys that really helps them with Stevenson down. I don't feel like it was a random spike. I think the role's kind of been building all season. Sometimes we see these rookies just take a little bit longer. And if the Patriots keep winning, they're going to be an offense that we want to continue to get more shares of. And I think it's going to be an efficient and effective offense going forward. It's legitimately looked good with the emergence of Drake May this year. So you're buying into like that ascending offense and not just a dead unit. I think this might be one of your last chances, though, to get an explosive lead back in this offense going forward. It looks like that reports are saying Stevenson might be out longer than expected. So the replacement behind Henderson is described as like a career practice squad guy. So I'm not necessarily believing that it's going to be an issue there. I think that Henderson's going to continue to get as much as he can handle. And the fact that he was leading the team in targets, that's the thing I keep coming back to. And I think it's super bullish for him rest of season, or at least as long as Stevenson is out. Let's talk about Tyjae Spears for a second. The Titans backfield is kind of already a 50-50 split. In week 9, Spears handled 7 carries, 3 catches, 62 yards. Pollard saw 10 carries and 1 catch. The touch share was basically even. So since returning from IR, he's kind of lived in that like 8 to 12 touch range every week. While I think that the gap in usage here is kind of inched even closer between him and Pollard. So I think like he's basically the clear stash behind Pollard. That's definitely true. But his passing game role kind of has him like with sneaky PPR upside, but also just like a little bit of standalone value as well. So if there was an injury here, so like one injury away type of player, he's actually one of my favorite guys to stash right now. And if you can grab him or trade for him, definitely think that he's a guy that I would be targeting rest of season. We've already kind of seen what happens when they unleash him. Week 8 against the Colts, 9 carries, 3 catches, 82 total yards, and a touchdown. That's real spike week production on just 12 touches. So late last season when Tennessee finally featured him, he ripped off some huge fantasy finishes. He was the RB5 in one of those games, 23 touches for 103 yards in week 17 before he got a concussion, which kind of cut things short a little bit. So I think that this season is already kind of a mess for Tennessee. So I think they just kind of need to feature what the best player is. And I actually think that Spears is one of those guys that if he does continue to get that usage through the passing game, he might be a little bit more valuable. So very interesting, something I'm monitoring, but I think he's still an interesting target as like a throw-in on some of your trades right now. Speaking of Kamani Vidal, he was a throw-in on some trades, I feel like just a couple weeks ago, and we thought that Omarion Hampton would be back sooner, but it really hasn't happened. So Omarion Hampton on the shelf, obviously he's still in a walking boot, people are saying. So he's out until at least week 12. We just talked about that in the news section. They're not opening up his window yet. So Vidal has already started and operated kind of as that Chargers unquestioned RB1 since like week 6, week 7. I think we've kind of already seen the ceiling. He has top 10 weekly upside already on his resume this year. So he already had that monster rushing line, 124 yards in week 6, 117 yards and a touchdown in week 8. So he has some blow up weeks. The concern here is going to be the offensive line for the Chargers. If they can't get healthier and they are losing some guys rest of the season, that'd be my biggest concern here. So the bad box scores, like the clunkers that we've seen in a couple of these games, they were in pretty tough matchups. But when the Chargers kind of actually have controlled games, the game that comes to mind is the win over Miami. They blew out Minnesota. That's kind of where those spots have looked for him to really show his ceiling, 124-yard ceiling, 117-yard rushing ceiling. So I think you kind of can play matchups with Vidal and feel pretty good about it because the remaining schedule projects as pretty easy from a fantasy running back perspective. So he's already kind of being described as like by most people as like just a workload based running back too. But I think he has some room for weekly ceiling to spike, especially with him with Hampton still in a walking boot. He's like that guy that I'd be actively trading for, and you can kind of play that a little bit up just to see if someone thinks that Hampton's going to be back sooner than he will be most likely. Someone that I am historically not very huge on, but I do like him as a trade target right now, Kyren Williams. These workhorse locked in backs are very hard to come by right now. And if you're just looking at people's rest of season rankings and kind of how everyone's looking at Kyren Williams, you can get him probably a little bit cheaper than I think people realize. And I think that at this type of workload, week 9, he had 25 carries, 114 yards, and a touchdown. This blowout win over the Saints. The Rams have been good too, so they're going to be playing ahead a lot. I get it. It was his first 100-yard rushing game of the season, so that's not great. But I think he's like the locked-in RB1 that's just getting a lot of disrespect, and the volume is all that matters. Volume is king at running back. So if you can get like the 15 to 20 carries every single week, he does have a little bit of receiving ceiling as well, and obviously the touchdown upside is huge. Devontae Adams has hurt his touchdown upside more than I expected, but I do think it's right there. I'm not that worried about Blake Corum. I think he's more of an annoyance than be like a real threat, but I do think that it's something to consider and something that you can use to trade for him. I think that you can probably slightly underpay and get Kyren Williams at this point of the season, and this is a really good week to attack him. So we've talked about 5 running backs so far: Kyren Williams, Kamani Vidal, Tajay Spears, Travion Henderson, and Jahmyr Gibbs. Those would be at least 5 of the guys I'd be betting my house on in fantasy football rest of season. So we're going to talk about 5 wide receivers next that I would be actively trading for. And the first one should be obvious, but let's buy low on Rome Odunze. Obviously, the future role with Caleb Williams, he's still the wide receiver 1 here, gives us a 0 on 3 targets last week, but I still think that we want to bet on Ben Johnson's offense. This team has been running ball super effectively, so we knew that the volume would definitely be spread out a little bit, but I actually think that will regress back to the mean, and I still think that we're going to be actively targeting Odunze and just looking at him as like one of those wide receiver 1s the rest of the season. So if we can grab him after that donut, it's the perfect buy window for him. And I think that dud was something that we probably could have seen coming eventually, just with how this team has really shifted to a run-first mindset. He also hasn't scored since week 4, so he's leaving some fantasy points on the table. We kind of know that this is the floor, but if we can get back to those ceiling games that we saw earlier in the season, I do think that you can grab him for a cheaper price tag than he's worth the rest of the season. Ladd McConkey. I already talked about how I'm a little bit concerned about the offensive line. I'm mostly just concerned because what if this passing volume isn't as huge as we've seen most of the season? What if they aren't dropping back as many times and they do shift into more of a run-first team, which we've seen at times in this Chargers regime? I think that McConkey in particular would be the one guy that I would be betting on rest of season, though, in this passing game. I think he's back to being like a real piece of this offense. He's earning a large share, obviously, of the work, but he kind of just lives in like that 20 plus point range or whatever. This offense is just continuously putting up like 2 to 3 touchdowns. And I think that in fantasy, just attaching yourself to a receiver on an offense that regularly hits that, like one of the more elite offenses, and the touchdown chances that you get there, that's what really matters. So you're not really chasing points on like a bottom tier unit this time of the season. You're trading for wide receivers on offenses that are tied to elite quarterbacks that have already proven that they can move the ball and finish drives. So I think that's kind of the strategy here. And I think that the Chargers defense has definitely limited things a little bit. They've allowed the 8th fewest points per game to opposing wide receivers and even held the Chiefs running backs to just 41 rushing yards. So the defense has been pretty good, but the strength of schedule the rest of the way is relatively strong. So I think that combination, again, with this team maybe condensing things a little bit on the target share, would definitely be the bull signal here. And this might be one of your last chances to buy kind of a locked in Chargers wide receiver 1 at a discount. Obviously, what they've been able to do at the tight end position goes without saying, but I do think that if you want a wide receiver in this offense rest of season, the guy that I'd be trading for is Ladd McConkey. And I'm still going to continue to buy low on Nico Collins. Like those elite alpha numbers in limited games this year is something that I still can't ignore. He turned just 12 games into 68 catches, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. That's wide receiver 1 level output before you even factor in the weeks that he's missed. So on a per route basis, 2.87 yards per route run. He's behind only Puka Nacua and A.J. Brown this year while being targeted on 28% of his routes, commanding a 33.4% of the team's targets when he's active. He's also had a massive role in the red zone, soaked up 39.4% of Houston's targets, 57.9% of their end zone looks when he was on the field. That's insane. So completely alpha. So if someone is really not treating him in that way, I'm actively trying to get as much Nico Collins as possible. And I think that they've kind of been stuck in like these low scoring, grinded out games. like the 14-9 game against the Rams, the 17-10 game versus the Jaguars, 18-15 versus the Broncos. So while their defense has allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and obviously the passing touchdowns haven't been coming as well, the offense just looks a little bit uglier than it should. I think this role is much better than people realize still. And they don't really have like that elite wide receiver too after getting healthier. I still think that there's one clear alpha here. So I think that if we're just looking at the concussion, obviously, hopefully that gets better and his production kind of catches back up to his profile. But if there's going to be a Nico Collins owner that will let him go, actively interested in that, actively packaging together 2 starters for Nico Collins has been an approach that I've taken so far pretty effectively. Let's talk about Garrett Wilson. Obviously, all the trades the Jets just made, they did end up keeping Breece Hall. They did end up keeping Garrett Wilson. So to me, he's basically had kind of like an alpha volume when he's been in type of season. This team, like the perception's obviously bad, but I think that we still want to go after these elite usage, even the broken efficiency type of players, if we can buy the dip here. So 4th in total targets, just 80th in yards per target. The classic volume is elite, but the efficiency has gotten absolutely wrecked by quarterback play. So that's what I'd be selling to the current owner. But I still think that they're like, even if you just look at the game logs, the proof is here that he is like the engine of this offense, not just a passenger for the most part. So he's really the only Jet to clear like the target share that we would want in like a disaster offense. And I think that there's like comparisons you can make to like Chris Olave and his situations there. But in general, I think that once he returns, which should be soon, this team is like one of the worst offenses in the league. But now that like there's less competition in general, like the entire offense should run through him. So I think it's kind of like you buy low on this like drama, and he could still have some eruptions down the road. He wasn't one of these guys that I was targeting going into the season because I thought there was always a chance that this team could completely implode. But Justin Fields is kind of locked into him. I think there's definitely a path here to like 30 plus target share upside. And the window to trade for Garrett Wilson is now when things are the lowest for this offense. DK Metcalf. So the splash plays are really what you're getting here with Rodgers this year, and Metcalf, 29 catches on 47 targets, 467 yards, but he does have 5 touchdowns in 8 games. So 16.1 yards per target, or yards per reception, I should say, as the primary downfield weapon for this team. He's already delivered some pretty big games with touchdowns as well. So I don't think he's gone like full on nuclear yet. But I do think it's better than most people expected for him, and a guy that myself included kind of rode off a little bit, just being capped by Pittsburgh's passing volume. So the target competition is basically non-existent. So these are the type of receivers that I think their role is so safe, but also they have just baked in ceiling. He could basically sleepwalk into a 25 to 30% target share in Pittsburgh, and the touchdown like scoring ability that he has is definitely like that big bodied wide receiver one is always someone that Rodgers is like a go-to guy in the red zone for. So if you end up getting into shootouts, because this defense hasn't been that good, I think that he is a guy that could benefit down the stretch. And I think this is a really nice time to buy. Obviously, week 9 was kind of like his rock bottom, in my opinion. So a buy low after he goes 2 for 4 and 6 yards with a couple missed end zone chances. I think that it really is a really nice situation to buy into. And the wide receiver strength of schedule chart for Pittsburgh looks really, I mean, at least neutral the rest of the way. So I think he's like a borderline wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type of guy with upside for even more. All right, get out there, make me proud, swing some trades. Let me know in the comments if you get anything done.